If you like the content and willing to support my effort, then please subscribe to my channel, give it a like and share it with everyone. Thank you. Hi everyone. So today we're gonna look at another game from the tournament Tournoi des Generations, or Tournament of Generations if I may call it, that was organized in the city of Cannes in France in the year 1989. We have already seen another game from the same tournament that was played between Mikhail Tal and Vishwanathan Anand, and Anand had a victory in that game. In case you haven't watched the video, then the link is in the description below. In this video, we're gonna look at the game between future world champion Vishwanathan Anand and the former world champion Boris Spassky. It was from round 3, and Anand is playing with the white pieces and Spassky with the black pieces. It was the month of February, so Spassky was 52 years old and Anand was 19 years old. So however, without further delay, let us dive into the game. Anand begins the game with e4 and Spassky replies with e5, the king's pawn opening. So we're looking at knight f3 attacking this pawn, knight c6 defending it, and bishop b5. The royal hope is on the board. And well, the idea is that this knight is defending this e5 pawn, so white is willing to capture this knight in order to capture this pawn. However, Spassky replies with a6, the Morphy defense, and instead of capturing this knight, white goes for bishop a4, the closed variation. We are looking at knight f6 attacking this pawn, and white simply castles. Bishop e7 making a nice little room for the king to castle, also preventing any potential threat on this e file, and then finally rook e1. Well, what is the idea behind this kind of move? Well, first of all, white is willing to defend this pawn on e4. At the same time, in this kind of like Roy Lopez is an opening of remaneuvering the pieces over and over again. So in Roy Lopez, it's a very common idea of pushing c3 and d4, and also bring this knight from b1 to g3. Okay, so first of all, we need to understand that this c3 square is blocked and it is for the pawn to come. And one of the possible ways of bringing this knight to g3 is from b1 to c3 to e2 to g3. Now we cannot use c3 because it's it's assigned for the pawn. So the other possible way is b1 to d2 to f1 and g3, and that's why this kind of move is played by white, rook e1, in order to free this square. And these are the part of standard opening, so we are not going deep into that. Maybe in some other video we can discuss about these. However, let us just move on with the game. So black goes for b5 attacking this bishop b3, and then d6 defending this pawn on e5, at the same time activating the light square bishop. And well, black is willing to bring this bishop to g4, pin this knight against the queen, so that this knight won't be there available to protect this d4 square, and it actually prevents white from pushing d4. White is willing to push d4 anyway, so c3 preparing for d4, castles by black, and then h3, preventing the idea of bishop g4, and then black goes for knight b8, the Breyer variation. Now the main idea in Breyer is that this knight is kind of misplaced. It cannot come to b4 or d4, and also this pawn on c7 is blocked. So one of the possible options is obviously knight a5 attacking this bishop, which is known as the Chigorin variation, and the other option is this mysterious or suspicious knight retreat, which is a knight b8. The idea is bringing this knight from c6 to b8 to d7, preparing for this c5 push. Also, black is willing to bring his bishop to b7 and put some pressure on this e4 pawn. So that is the main idea behind Breyer, and white goes for d4 as he was planning from earlier. Knight b d7 by black and c4 with the idea of taking control of the center, and then c6 by black, preventing the idea of any d5 push by white and closing the center. And a3 by white, preventing the idea of b4 by black. And then after b into c4, bishop into c4, black goes for d5, and black is actually here forcing white to trade off some of the pieces, because black is actually willing to take a good control of the center, and let us see how. At this point of time, we can see that this pawn is been attacked twice and it is defended once. So there are no other choices left for white except to capture this pawn. So after ed, cd and bishop a2, we are looking at e4, taking the control of the center. Now white has only one central pawn, whereas black has two, and he has a nice little control of the center that we can see. So white goes for knight e5, putting an outpost over the center, and then bishop b7 by black, defending this pawn, because this d5 pawn is now kind of backward, and white is also willing to capture this pawn in some way. So white goes for knight c3, attacking this pawn, and now you can see that this pawn is being defended twice, and it's been attacked twice. So it's a battle for capturing this pawn. And suppose in this kind of situation, black goes for knight into e5, thinking that he is actually increasing another defender. Then there can be some problem for black, because after d into e5, this knight has nowhere to go except to go to knight d7. Then after bishop into d5, bishop into d5, knight into d5, knight into e5, knight into e7 check, queen into e7, and then rook into e4, capturing this pawn. Now white is up a pawn, and also this knight is under attack, and f4 is coming, and the position is not looking so good for black. So instead of capturing this knight, black here goes for a knight b6 first, f3 by white, trying to break the center, rook c8 by black, taking control of this open c file, and then bishop b3. Well, the idea is white is willing to bring this bishop to c2. So we are looking at bishop a8 and bishop g5 by white. So white is willing to capture this knight in order to decrease one defender of this d5 pawn. Here in this situation, if black is willing to keep this knight, then knight f d7 is not possible, because after knight into d7, queen into d7, bishop into e7, queen into e7, f e d e, and queen e2, putting pressure on this e pawn, at the same time forking these two pawns. So suppose rook ce8, then white can go for queen into a6, picking up this pawn, and in this kind of situation queen d8 is not possible, because rook a d1 simply can save the day for white, and now white is simply a pawn up. So knight f d7 clearly cannot be an option. Instead, black goes for rook c7 with the idea of defending these two squares. Now knight f d7 is possible. So rook c1 by white, taking control of this open file for himself, and then knight f d7, because now this knight capture does not work. Suppose, let us look at the variation. Suppose here white goes for knight into d7, then simply rook into d7, bishop into e7, rook into e7, f e d e, queen e2, but queen into d4 check, and now black is up a pawn. So that's why this variation does not work after rook c7. So white is willing to keep this, white is trying to keep this bishop by bishop f4, but then simply bishop g5. Now white needs to defend this rook on c1, so that's why it is kind of forced for him to play bishop into g5, queen into g5, and then we are looking at f e d e and queen g4. Now this pawn is being attacked thrice by the queen, rook and knight, and defended only once by this bishop. So that's why it's mandatory for black to go for a queen exchange. So after queen into g4, knight into g4, we are looking at g6 with the plan of maybe bringing this king into the game, because the queens are exchanged. So now king is gonna play some role, some vital role in the game. So if here white goes for knight into e4, picking up this pawn, that is not possible, simply because this rook is under attack. So after rook into c1, this knight is under attack by the bishop, so white cannot go for capturing this rook, because he will just then lose a piece. And if he tries to go for some intermediate move, suppose knight into f6, knight f6 check, knight into f6, knight into f6 check, king g7, attacking this knight. So after rook into c1, king into f6, white is now down by a piece. So instead of capturing this pawn, he first go for knight f2, bringing another attacker into the game. Now this knight is also attacking this pawn, and rook e8 by black, defending this pawn once more. d5 by white, removing one defender of this e4 pawn, because now this bishop is no longer defending this e4 pawn. King g7, bringing this king into the game, and then finally knight f into e4. Black goes for knight into d5, winning back this pawn. So knight d6 by Anand, with some kind of sneaky idea that we are going to see in near future. Now this knight is now attacking this rook on e8. So it is mandatory rook into e1 check. Rook into e1, now this knight is under attack, so the obvious choice is knight 5 to f6, and then rook e7 by white, attacking this pawn on f7, with the idea of winning a pawn, and there is no other way for black to defend it. So Spassky goes for rook c6, attacking this knight. Then simply rook into f7 check, and as this attack is coming up with a check, there is no way for black to capture this knight. Now king g8 is not possible, because then several discoveries are coming. So obviously either h8, or in the actual game which we are looking at, king h6. Knight c4 by white, defending this knight, and then rook e6 by black, with the idea of bringing the rook into the game and giving some checks, or maybe some kind of counterplay. King f2 and king g5, both the players are now trying to bring the kings into the game, and then bishop c2 by white, with the idea of, now he is willing to push these pawns, and because there is a majority on the queen side, it's more or less, it seems like white is gonna get the success in queening one of the pawns at least. Bishop to c6 by Spassky, with the idea of preventing any further a4 push, and then knight d2 by Anand, with the idea of remaneuvering this knight from d2 to b3 to c5, and defending this a4 square, with the idea of pushing a4. So Spassky goes for h5, with the idea of preventing g4, and then knight b3 by Anand. He is going according to the plan. So Spassky goes for knight e5, now attacking this rook. It has to move, so obviously rook a7, attacking this pawn. So here Spassky goes for a very nice idea. In order to win back the pawn, he goes for knight eg4 check. Now here this king is under check, so obviously it needs to move. These three squares are defended by the rook, and king g1 is not possible, simply because rook e1 is checkmate, a classic example of knight and rook checkmate. And for the same reason, king g3 is not possible, because rook e3 is checkmate. So in this situation, it is kind of forced for white to go for capturing this knight. So after h into g4, knight into g4 check. Now again, for the same reason, king g3 and king g1 is not possible. So the only alternative is king f1, and then Spassky goes for knight e3 check, forking this bishop and this king. So after king g1, Spassky goes for knight into c2, winning back this material, and now we can see that the material is completely equal. But unfortunately, this pawn is now hanging, and he loses the pawn by rook into a6, and now Anand is again going for the end game with an extra pawn. Bishop d7, so we're looking at rook into a6, bishop into e6, and then knight c5, preparing for this a4 push. So bishop c4 by Spassky, he is now guarding this a6 square. He is also willing to bring this knight to b4 in order to guard this a6 square. But let's see how Anand can continue in this kind of situation. He goes for simply a4. King f4 by black, bringing this king closer to the situation, but simply a5, and then Spassky is going for knight b4. Now this a6 square is defended once and being attacked twice, so obviously white needs to do something. Anand simply goes for b3. Now this bishop is under attack. He cannot go for capturing this pawn, because he will then lose this bishop. it cannot go to any of the squares on this diagonal. This square is defended by this knight, this square is defended by this knight, and all the squares are defended by some of the knights or the king itself. And Spassky goes for bishop f7 with the idea of remaneuvering or let's say rerouting this bishop from f7 to e8 and then c6 with the idea of guarding this a8 square. Anand goes for knight d3 check. So now this knight is under attack and also this king is under check. There is no other way for black to move his king, because then he will just lose this knight. So obviously the option is knight into d3. So white goes for a6 and black goes for bishop e8 with the idea of bringing this bishop to c6. And suppose white goes for a7 say, then black can simply go for bishop c6 and the position is completely draw. It is not possible for white to win. So what is the solution here? Well, the solution is white needs to defend this c6 square, and that is possible with the help of this knight. He is willing to remaneuver this knight from c3 to d5 to e7, and thus he can defend this c6 square, and that is the basic idea of white here. So white here goes for knight d5 check. And here in this position on move 51, Boris Spassky resigned the game and Vishwanathan Anand went on winning this game also, because now it is not possible for black to prevent this pawn from queening. Suppose here this king is under check, so suppose here black goes for king e5, then simply white can go for knight e7. Now this knight is preventing this bishop to come to this c6 square. So if king goes to e6, then simply a7, this bishop is still cannot come to this c6 square, and then after king into e7, a8 equals queen, and now white is clearly winning. He will just go on giving forks and like pick up the rest of the pieces of black, and it's a clear win for white here. So with this, we're coming to the end of the game, and at the same time end of the video. We have seen a marvelous game by Vishy Anand and Boris Spassky. It was a very good game and I enjoyed a lot while analyzing this game. With this, I am taking your leave and see you next time with some other exciting game.